If you haven't watched the previous 3 videos in this playlist, do so now, as this is a continuation of those videos. The link is in the description. Let's begin. The year is 494 BC, and the available Persians have regrouped into one standing army and are accompanied by a fleet of re-subjugated Cypriots, Egyptians, Phoenicians, and Cilicians. The Ionians decided not to fight on land and opted to gather every ship to meet at Lade, an island off the coast of Miletus. Altogether, the Ionians had 353 triremes, while the Persians had 600, but with no mastery at sea. The Persians knew they might fail, so they called together the Ionian tyrants whom had fled to Medes for refuge. They told them to attempt to get their people to withdraw from the revolt, and they would have their cities back unharmed and without consequence for rebelling. The tyrants did so, but the people refused and continued to rebel. Afterwards, Dionysius, who is the commander of the Ionian naval fleet, held a council where he had made a morale-boosting speech, and the Ionians committed themselves. He proceeded every day to train to make the ships move in column, rowers ply their oars, and breaking the enemy line. This continued for 7 days, and by the 8th day, the Ionians were fatigued. They gossiped to one another about what god they offended to receive this punishment, and stated that slavery is better than this hardship. They proceeded to disobey Dionysius' orders. When the Samians learned what was taking place, they were more inclined to accept the Persian terms of surrender. They realized it was hopeless to contend with the king, since if they won the battle, more would take place. The Persian naval fleet arrived soon afterwards to attack, and the Ionians put themselves in line and went out to meet them in the Battle of Lade. The Samians withdrew, and the Lesbians soon followed after seeing the Samians flee. Many more ships in the Ionian fleet followed suit, and the rest continued to fight. The Chians at one point broke through the Persian line and captured some ships, but sustained many losses of their own. Eventually the remaining Chian ships fled, ending the battle. Dionysius managed to capture 3 Persian ships, but perceived that all was lost after seeing his allies flee. He fled as well, and traveled to Sicily and plundered merchant ships for the rest of his life. All in all, the Ionians lost 246 ships, while the Persians only 57. The Persians, having just defeated the Ionian fleet, laid siege to Miletus by land and sea. They mined the walls until at last they took the city and the inhabitants were killed or reduced to slavery. The prisoners whose lives were spared were sent to Susa and received no ill treatment by King Darius, but were moved to a new city on the Persian Gulf. Miletus was effectively destroyed. The Samians were displeased by what they had done by fleeing, and held a council where they resolved that they would not remain to become slaves, and they would sail away and found a new colony in another land. They eventually settled in a town called Zancle, which is currently named Messina today in Sicily. The Persians spared the remaining Samians because of their defection. Meanwhile, Histiaeus received news of the fall of Miletus, who was still at Byzantium intercepting merchant ships. He quickly set sail for Chios as the new leader of the resistance against Persia. At Chios, the Chians refused to receive Histiaeus, and Histiaeus destroyed what was left of the Chian fleet. Histiaeus now led an army composed of remaining Ionians and Aeolians who were still rebelling and laid siege to Thassos. While besieging Thassos, he heard the Phoenicians were attacking other cities in Ionia. Histiaeus raised his siege and hastened to Lesbos with his army. His army became hungry, so he sailed to the mainland intending to cut some crops, but he met a small Persian army there as well. The Battle of Lade had began, and the battle was hard fought, but was ended by a successful Persian cavalry charge which routed the Ionian line. Histiaeus surrendered himself to a Persian who was about to run him down. Histiaeus had hoped to be taken before the king, who would have potentially pardoned him, but he was brought before Artaphernes and Sardes instead, who quickly put Histiaeus to death, because if he was freed, he would have been pardoned by the king. Artaphernes sent Histiaeus' head to the king, and found great fault in not having his men bring him alive. He commanded his servants to wash his head with great care, and then bury it. The naval Persian armament stayed at the remains of Miletus during the winter, then proceeded to attack the islands off the coast, including Chios, Lesbos, and Tenedos, without difficulty. They scanned the islands for any hidden rebels, forming a large human net from coast to coast to walk along the entire island. Then they attacked the remaining Ionian towns on the mainland and made them slaves. The sea force proceeded to the Hellespont and took all of the towns on the left shore, as the right shore had already been under Persian rule. With all of Asia Minor now returned to Persian rule, the revolt was finally over. The Persians did no more hurt to the Ionians since the region was under their control again, because they didn't want another rebellion starting up. Artapherne summoned deputies from all the Ionian cities and forced them into agreements not to harass each other, and would have their disputes settled by judges. Seeing that the Ionians disliked tyrannies, Mardonius, another son-in-law to King Darius, sailed to Ionia and established democracies, but the Persians still had some unfinished business. They still had to exact punishment on Athens for supporting the revolt as they threatened the stability of the empire. King Darius began to plan his conquest of Greece, and so ends the first act of the Greco-Persian Wars. Thank you all for watching.